The Senate is resumed. Senator Cannon Dr. Rogers.
Thank you very much, Mr. President, and for recognizing me and affording me the opportunity to speak on this particular piece of legislation. As we would have mentioned some time back when we were discussing the Child Protection Bill, I would have made the point that I believe that the two bills are flip sides of each other, and it was quite appropriate that we were discussing the Child Protection Bill in Home and Family Month, or Child Month, and now today we are discussing this particular bill, the Child Justice Bill, on the day that we've designated as Flag Day. And it really underpins the importance of these two pieces of legislation in terms of the strengthening of the fabric of our nation, because I believe that we can all agree it doesn't take too many bad apples to spoil the bunch. And if we do not do what is necessary to safeguard our children, when we become old, and I think I'm speaking for all of us in here, when we become old, we may very well find ourselves prisoners in our own homes. In many cases where the Child Protection Bill does not protect an individual or child, that young person becomes a victim of abuse, in some cases torture. It can lead to a loss of hope, it can lead to anger, and they may very well become the perpetrators of this child justice bill that we are trying to help. I remember on the last occasion I would have made the point, quoted from Frederick Douglass, who said, "It is easier to raise strong children than to fix broken men." It is easier to raise strong children than to fix broken men. But this bill that we're discussing then cannot just be seen in a vacuum. It must be taken in, as other senators have pointed out, looking at the whole panoply of everything in our community. And to this end, I wish to reflect on it using what I refer to as the social trinity: the importance of the home, the educational institution or the school, and the religious institution, and how those three must work together to keep the fabric of the society together and to guide and nurture our children. As Senator Cummings would have pointed out this morning when she spoke, sir, our little children are innocent. When they come into this world, they're innocent little children. All of them have depended on a mother or a father or some caretaker to nourish them and to nurture them. But over time, we pour things into them, as Senator Cummings would have said. And what we pour into them determines what they become. I think the Jews put it another way. There's an old Jewish saying that at 5, your son is your master. At 10, he's your slave. At 15, he's your double. Then after that, he's your friend or your foe, depending on his upbringing. And it really speaks to how we shape children by the way we treat to them and how we deal with them as their children. Social institutions, sir, and the environment help to provide the parameters in which children grow and in which they learn about themselves and the society. You would have heard me on many occasions talking about the importance of civics within our society, because there needs to be an understanding that, yes, I'm an individual, but I'm an individual that is a part of a whole. And so the whole has its rules, the whole has its structure. And within this context, the social trinity operates so that the children will know the parameters in which they're to function within the society, to become the type of citizens that we expect them to be. Having sat on the Joint Select Committee and looking at this bill, sir, many suggestions came in about parent involvement. There was a very, very strong lobby for parental rights. And I understand that, and I encourage that. Parents must play a critical role in the lives of children and their upbringing. And I wish to encourage those who lobbied for that to continue to lobby, but let us remember that we cannot generalize when we're speaking about parents, and recognize that it is a society that we're building. And I've said it in other places before, I'll say it here. Not all people who have children should be around children. Not all people who have children should be around children. And it sounds strange. The parents, why can't they be around? You see, sir, we observe Mother's Day and we observe Father's Day within the last few weeks, but as said before, being a father is more than the mere contribution of a few ounces of biological matter. And being a mother is more than the attestation of one's fecundity. There has to be something more than that. And that is what we're seeking to reinforce in these bills, that there are times when the child must be protected from its parent, and there are times when the parents must be protected from their child based on the upbringing that they would have given them. And we've seen that before. Some years ago, I was looking for the article, it was a newspaper article years ago, where there were some parents running to try to get their toddlers into Dodds because they couldn't control them anymore. And you were wondering, why are they carrying these little children into the school? Because when they were young, as that Jewish saying said, they were the little man and the little woman, and you dress them up like that, but then when the little man and little woman starts talking back, everybody has a problem, you see? So these are some of the issues that we have within our society. It is Ephesians 6 and verse 4, remind parents, do not provoke your children to anger. And sometimes a lot of children are provoked to anger just by the way they're raised, just by the way they are socialized, sometimes by the neglect that they experience. And so it is important, this child justice bill, to ensure that there's a separation sometimes of children from their parents. But there's also the other aspect that has been brought up here today, sir. Some homes just do not have the wherewithal to nurture children. They do not have the support system. Their parents who are struggling, their parents who are part of the struggle, or the hustle as they call it. And some days, there's nothing materially for children to survive on. I believe it was the reggae artist, Jamaican reggae artist, DeVille, who raised the question, do you know what it is like to have no food to eat? We know what it's like to be hungry. Most of us have been hungry at some point in time. We know what it is to go downtown and you got delayed and you didn't get back home, but you know there's something home to eat. I think the question here he was asking, do you know what it is when there's nothing there? When there's nothing available at all? What do you do? Well, Buju Banton answered the question. He said, circumstances make me what I am. You do what is necessary to survive, as Senator King said. It was also Jamaican artist Richie Spice who said, earth will run red. 10-year-olds will look them and want to eat bread. The little children have to fight just for survival, to get something to eat. And this is the reality for some of our young people. And this sometimes leads them into places where they become prey for some negative elements in our society. I believe it was Senator King who made the point that there are young people out there who are committing heinous acts, and sometimes they're recruited by persons to do that because the penalties are different. I think I mentioned sometime before in Jamaica the whole notion of the wet, how the drug lord will give a little 14 or 15-year-old boy a spliff soaked in formaldehyde. He smokes that, he goes and kills somebody, it knocks his brain out, he can't remember what he does, and the crime is covered up. So our young people are being preyed upon. And sometimes that leads them into the criminal activities and the deviance that sometimes put them in a collision course with the justice system. I believe it was Senator King who also talked about the protection of staff, because by the time some of these children are recruited and they're trained, they're young, they're children, but they're hardened. They're hardened and they're trained to understand certain things. I think I was watching a documentary the other day where one guy said, when you grow up in the projects, you are taught if somebody hits you, retaliate twice harder. That's what you were taught. That was what was instilled in you. And so when we see some of our children acting out, it's the circumstances and the environment, similar to the study that Senator Watson would have brought to the chamber today. And as I said, a lot of this may be partially related to the home, as I've outlined above. Poor parental support, lack of discipline, lack of material things, and so on. And so we recognize that there are some deficiencies in our homes. But that's where the strength of the social trinity comes in. Because the school has always been there as an area of reinforcement, of support. I believe if you speak to many teachers within this country, they'll tell you the amount of lunch they buy every week. Because they become the parents for these children when they're at school. They have to provide. They become the role models. I remember teaching, and one young lady said to me, "Sir, you are my father." Because she had never known a father. She had never had a father figure in her life. And I believe that happens for a lot of male teachers out there, because there are so few in the system that the children, when the children encounter a male who is actually, they consider nice, and someone who doesn't want anything from them, all of a sudden they say, but men can be like that. And that's the reality for a lot of children in our system. So I was pleased when Senator Cummings spoke about the education system. But there's a question we must answer for ourselves as a people. What is the purpose of our education? What is the purpose of our education system? Is it simply to produce academics? The 3 R's, as they used to say, reading, writing, and arithmetic? Or should it be to produce well-rounded citizens? What is the purpose of our education system? I believe there's a saying, I can't tell you I can't tell you the source, but it says, to educate a man in mind and not in morals is to create a menace to the society. And we're educating a lot of people in mind, and we're pushing people through the system. But the well-roundedness and the understanding of my responsibility to the other and my responsibility to the state is missing in many cases. We must create children who understand who they are and who value themselves. School must become a second home as it was in the past. I believe that many of us who came up in a particular time, many of a particular vintage, would recount the stories of the old-time teacher. The old-time teacher who went above and beyond the call of duty. When they saw a little child with potential, they did everything to try to help him or her. When they saw that you were weak in an area, they spent extra time trying to strengthen you. Sometimes we hear of the teachers throwing the children into their car because they kept them for lessons late and carrying them home and so on. I know we're in a different age now, but that was the nature of the teacher. Sadly, we're in an era, sir, where lessons have become the big business. And if the child is not going to lessons, there's little or no hope for him or her. But the reality is that we live in a society where everyone can't afford lessons. And so what happens to the child who cannot afford? Whose parents cannot afford to send them to the lessons that the others are going to from the time they're in infants A or whatever to do an 11+ exam. that will mean nothing after. But it's become a status symbol. It's become a way to separate ourselves from each other. And strangely enough, teachers are under the same pressure. Because if your 11 plus results do not look good, something is wrong with you. Whereas the time that should be spent trying to nurture these children is now spent into pumping, trying to pump up for an exam. I have no problem with the 11 plus exam. I never sat it. And I don't know what the pressure is like, as I've said many times before. When I went into first form, I just did my normal end of term exam and went to the next class. It was just a normal thing. So it's not the same thing for me, but I believe that we're putting too much pressure on our children, too much pressure on our teachers, and as a result, the children are not being as rounded as they ought to be in the primary school system. And one of the things, I had the opportunity to work in one of our schools, sir, and I've been drumming it home to the members of the board, the principal and deputy principal. Do not worry about the 11 plus results, because we do not really know the true aptitude of these children. We do not know the true aptitude of these children. Some people develop a little later than others. Do not pay any attention to that. Let's go in there and try to see where this child is at and how we can get them to the next level where they ought to be. And I believe that we need to take that approach when it comes to our children, because too many of them are damaged at an early age. And they begin to hate the system, because as far as they're concerned, it's the system that worked against me. The system doesn't like me. And some of them will become the same ones that this child justice bill is trying to help. Because when they go into a school and they're told that they're failures, they'll believe they're failures, and they'll be failures for the next 5 years in their own minds. And I always say, you see that September after your summer of your last year at school? That's a dangerous September. You'd have come home every summer, played with your friends, and go back to school. But this September, there's nowhere to go. And a lot of secondary schools, as I learned last year, are not taking back their children. There's nowhere to go. So just imagine the little boy at home, sir. He got about 10% in 11 plus. He went through school. He's a failure. Nobody took him on. He got promoted through. Just finished his 5th. And summer is finished, and it's now September. And everyone has gone back to school. He's at home in the house eating. And then somewhere somebody can say, but you ain't going to look for work. He can't go and look for any work, sir, because he doesn't have anything. And so the house becomes uncomfortable. And when the house becomes uncomfortable, people keep telling him, you need to get up and go and find something to do. But he doesn't have anything to go and get anything to do with. And so he goes where he can find at least someone who doesn't judge him. And he ends up on the block. But when you're on the block, what happens on the block, you're a part of it. And so he suddenly finds himself in a little cycle there that he cannot get out of. Not a bad boy, but just a system. And so we need to look at our education system, as I said. We have to make sure that no one falls through that net. Everything is not about math and English. As I said before in this place, if I didn't come to Barbados, I would never have CXC math. Because I couldn't get math done. I didn't care about it. And where I was living, you didn't have to have it to go to sixth form. I wasn't going to do it. When I came here, I met a good teacher at the Lodge School. Her name was Miss Weeks at the time, and Miss Weeks taught me that math was easy. And that's how I got it done. So sometimes it's just that little unlocking. And we need to make sure that we do not cast any of our children out there. Every one of them has something that they can become productive members of this society with. And so the school system needs to look at the whole child, the total child, and not just a few areas, not just their academic prowess. I can't nail two pieces of wood together to save my life. But I know guys I went to school with, they couldn't get math done, but they know how to square up everything and all kinds of, just different competencies. And we must celebrate these things and let them know that that is genius as well. Because, I mean, after all, because I could read a book or something doesn't mean I'm any better than the other person. You know? Schools have to become havens for our children. They have to become safe spaces, as Senator Cummins said, where they can be nurtured without the pressure of simply producing academically. Just understanding that whatever skill you have, whatever competence you have, is appreciated. And we will do everything we can to help you to become even better at it. But in addition to the school system, sir, there are the religious institutions. I'm using religious here broadly because I've preached in sermons before to tell people if your child is not going to Sunday school or Sabbath school or the mosque or the temple or somewhere, get them there. Because I believe that all religions have kernels of truth that can help to nurture our children. It was Emil Durkheim who said, "Take away from man his laws and his religion, and he's no different to the animals." Religious institutions are there as a part of the social construct to help to guide and nurture people in how this society operates, how they can function within the society. And the bedrock of our society, we like to tout how great our society is. The bedrock of this has been religious institutions. And the guidance that people received from religious and moral instruction. You will hear persons of a particular age saying, "I remember when I used to go to Sunday school in the morning and then in the afternoon, then evening service at this place," and sometimes it's all at different places. You will hear people saying, "I learned this song at school. New every morning is the love. The King of Love, my shepherd is there." People who can sing those songs without looking in a book because they were drilled in them in school. And all of a sudden, we receive that, and somehow we do not think it is necessary for our children. Somehow we do not seem to think that these are the things that helped us and shaped us into who we are. And that is what is missing in our society as well. I'm not here appealing for new members. I'm just saying that I believe that the religious institutions have an integral role to play in the strengthening of the fabric of the society and preventing children from coming into collision with the justice system. Senator Watson spoke about the lack of trust in authority. And I must say that I believe that it has emerged now where there's a lack of trust in religion and religious institutions, and we accept that. And those of us who are religious practitioners must take some of the blame for that, for what is happening in our society. But religious institutions must do what is necessary to provide the moral stability for our children, to provide a safe haven, to provide a group space where children can come and encounter their peers in positive activity. We must be sources of positive peer pressure. And I want to commend the Methodist Church here for the work they're doing in their music academy, Holy Trinity Anglican Church as well, St. George Anglican Church, which started it really. And what does that do, sir? It came about because I recognize that there are some children in this society who every Saturday and in the evenings after school, their parents can send them to extracurricular activities. They go to music, ballet, all kinds of things. And that's good. But there's some parents who have to work out between the pack of Eclipse biscuits, the bus fare, and other things. And so those extracurricular activities don't even factor in. And so what we were creating is a society that is not balanced. And so we provided the opportunity, we still provide the opportunity for children within the parish of St. George to come and learn to play a musical instrument, recognizing that music not only gives them an added skill, but it helps with discipline as well. And that is just a minor way in which the church can work to help to balance what is off balance within our society. I want to encourage religious organizations to recognize the role that they're called to play in the society in preventing our children from getting to that point where they become the prey for those who are seeking to lead their lives astray. Where these two pieces of legislation is concerned, there's one big issue though, sir. I meant to raise it the last time, but I'll raise it now. The wheels of justice in this country turn too slowly. The wheels of justice in this country turn too slowly. I recall a situation, sir. A young lady who was raped by one of her family members, and she confided in her teacher at the time. It became a court case. That lady was in third form, and that case did not come to an end until she was finished sixth form. Luckily, she had a strong family support. But these are some of the people who end up being the ones that we are forming this child justice bill for, because they lose their self-esteem. They lose their self-worth. They find themselves involved in activities which put them in conflict with the law, simply because the law did not act quickly enough to bring justice for them. And so we have to look at that within the context of everything we're doing here. I believe it was Senator Watson who spoke to the absence of education in the bill, but it is there in, I believe, clause 73, section 73, where the Child Justice Board in section 73 1B is supposed to give directions to the director of the residential facility in regard to the welfare of the children, including their education, their training, their recreation, their conduct, and their safety.
Yes, Senator Watson, what do you raise?
I raise on a point of elucidation. My specific comment is that it is missing from that section that enumerates the rights of the child while in a residential facility. I think that is the crux of my point. It should be a right. Thank you.
Thank you very much. All right. So in essence, what Senator Watson is saying is that the facility must be a home away from home, and everything that the child needs and everything the child should rightly have should be available to them. And I believe that that is something we can we can seek to reinforce as we go forward. But it comes back again to something that was raised. We also have to ensure that the child care facility is a safe haven for our children. And so staffing is important. Pedophiles tend to gravitate to where children are. People who like certain things gravitate to where that thing is. So the arsonist will go into cooking. I was going to make the point that in the church, we have a position called the thurifer. It's the person who swings the incense pot, sir. And there's a going saying that every thurifer must be a potential arsonist. You must light fire, you know, to smoke up the church and do it. Of course, in these times, that's not recommended with asthma and everything, but every thurifer must be a potential arsonist. So even the thurifer gravitates to that thing which he likes. It's fire. That being said, sir, I think that these two bills, the Child Protection Bill which we passed earlier, and the Child Justice Bill which we are seeking to pass today, are important for the development of our nation, because they speak directly to our future. That our children in this country must have a safe haven, and when, for one reason or another, they find themselves on the other side of the law, we must still see them as our children and do whatever is necessary to shape them into the men and women we want them to be. Because it is easier to raise children than to fix broken men. And so I hope that this child justice bill will go a long way in terms of rehabilitating those children who have fallen short of the mark, who find themselves on the other side of the law. For whatever reason they may have gotten themselves there. I hope that this can be a bill that is about rehabilitation, and its purpose is fulfilled in the lives of these children, so that our nation can be a better nation going forward. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Cameron Dr. Rogers.
Thank you.
Who's next? If no, Senator Amdeli Boyce.
Thank you, Mr. President, for recognizing me. It is always difficult speaking after Senator Reverend Dr. Rogers, because the sobriety and his call to conscience is always something worth reflecting on. Mr. President, permit me to begin by expressing my gratitude to the members of the Joint Select Committee, Standing Committee, who considered the contributions and considerations of Barbadians and brought this bill to the stage that it is today. I think that they have done yeoman service. Not only the members of the committee, but the Barbadians themselves, and I would wish to go on record as having extended my gratitude. Sir, I think that the ability of average Barbadians to contribute in a dedicated fashion to the development of legislation, sir, represents a deepening of Barbados' democracy. And it does so at a time when it is perhaps most important, at a time when we are 57 years post-independence, at a time when we are in the early years of our republic, sir, and when, quite frankly, the democracy must mean more. And so I am pleased that this child justice bill has gone through that process, sir. Of course, it also happens at a time when or perhaps I should say that the first bill we are treating to is a bill that has its vestiges in colonialism. The remnants of colonialism are all up and through the bill. The Reformatory and Industrial School Bill, sir, initially crafted in 1926 and last amended in 1998. A while ago, to say the very least, but at a time when the sensibilities of this country were very different in relation to the treatment of children, and particularly the treatment of children who came into conflict with the law. In 1926 and certainly in 1998 and certainly in 1926, we didn't come to an appreciation, sir, of the notion of human rights and the notions of dignity and the notions of equality, Mr. President. And all across the provisions of this bill that my colleagues have so ably spoken to, you see the tenets of those principles through the bill. And, sir, this bill is but one part, I think, of what is becoming an evolving part of an evolving appreciation of human rights in this country, sir, enshrining into our laws, into our regulations, and into our institutions the notions of equality and of dignity and of justice. I speak specifically, sir, of the Child Protection Bill, which accompanied this one as part of the report. But I also speak of much of the legislation coming out of our social policy ministry, the disability legislation, the elderly legislation, which all, sir, imbue these principles to the benefits of the Barbadian people, sir. And I think that this marks an important step in our democracy. It marks an important step in the country's development, because we are recognizing that the law is not intended to be a shackle, pardon the pun, I suppose, but it is intended to enfranchise and it is intended to benefit. And we have to, as citizens of this modern time, unburden this society from its colonial beginnings, Mr. President. I think that that is part of the process that we're going through today. Mr. President, many of my colleagues have spoken about the need for all of society to participate in the smooth functioning of a new child's justice system, sir. I was pleased to open the newspaper this morning and to see the comments of religious leaders talking about the ways in which they're prepared to contribute to making Barbados safer and better in what feels like an upswell in violence. And I think that perhaps we should all take measure of their comments. We should all commit ourselves in that way, because I think for too long we have perceived this to be somebody else's problem. We have perceived the issues of juvenile justice and juvenile delinquency to be the issues of the parents whose children behave in this way, and it will never be us and it will never be our children, and so we can carry on our lives as we always have. Mr. President, I hope though that we're coming to the realization that this is everybody's business, and that violence of any kind, a child coming into conflict with the law for any reason, is all of our concern. My colleagues, sir, spoke to this notion of training and the need for consistent training for staff members in the residential facilities and across the child justice system. I want to join that call, Mr. President, not only for staffers of the residential facility, but for police officers and probation officers and magistrates and clerks of the court, sir. Because we have to make the child justice system a child-friendly system, a system that does not seek to, in its very orientation, to punish or to further traumatize, Mr. President. And I call on the government to continue, because in some ways they have begun, the training with speed and scale and scope, Mr. President, for the sake of those children. And let me be very clear that I'm also making the call not only for children who may come into conflict with the law, but for victims and for child victims and for children who may be at the center of other types of familial fracas, children at the center of the dissolution of a marriage or property or anything else, Mr. President. We need to ensure that our child justice system meets the mark of being a child-friendly system. Sir, I don't intend to be terribly long, but perhaps my last point is that it is time that we embrace and create a culture of rehabilitation and reintegration, Mr. President, so that a child who passes through this child justice system has the ability to re-enter our societies and to be embraced and to be citizens who have the opportunity to contribute. And we will not achieve that, sir, by virtue of the static provisions of this legislation. We will achieve that, sir, when our societies embrace that notion. When all of us dispense with the idea of lick and lock up and dash away forever, and that we do not see people staying under marked with the scarlet letter of their past misdeeds, but that we see them as Barbadians who, as the leader of government business said this morning, have fallen but are deserving of grace and reintegration, Mr. President. Sir, The Child Justice Bill is but one part in the architecture that the Barbados government is building to ensure the safety and the protection and the inclusion of all Barbadians. And I ask Barbadians all to join us, to join in the effort of ensuring that its provisions inspire in this country systems that inure to the benefit of children and inure to the benefit of this society. With those very few words, Mr. President, I'm obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Boyce. Senator Reverend Morris.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I rise to support this legislation that is before us this afternoon. I support it, sir, because I perceive that this legislation stands to improve the lot of our children in this country. If I appear to be a bit subdued, it is because I look at this legislation and I look at myself as a boy growing up in Blackbreast. And looking at it from this perspective, I understand why there is a need for it. Because I'm sure that there are certain individuals, certain children in our society who was not, or who are not, or were not as fortunate as me to have a network of support so that I may continue on the path of righteousness. I always ask myself, why is there the need for such legislation? In certain circumstances, I would take a theological approach, but the Reverend Senator Dr. Rogers has already taken that approach. And I prefer to take an historical approach. And in taking this historical approach, I want to look at myself as well. I want to see myself in this legislation, because there are circumstances in the Bible where Jesus never referred to a person's name, a man, a certain man, or a certain woman, and that is left there so that we can put ourselves into it. So this legislation refers to a child, and I believe I can put myself into it as well. The previous legislation, or the legislation which this piece of legislation intends to replace, I want to look at it from the perspective of history. That legislation, sir, I think, was enacted around 1927, just 10 years before the, I call it rebellion in Barbados. The point is that almost 100 years have passed, and this legislation will still be on our statute books. Even by the time of 1937, children were still perceived as fit for the plantation. I was still working in the picnic gang that was on the slave plantation. With the advent of emancipation, that perception was continued. They were left in the dark. And then the disturbances came. And then many of us would know that the colonial authorities investigated. And one of the persons they sent to the Caribbean to investigate was a gentleman called George Saini. And he was the chairman of the committee that looked into what caused these disturbances. In fact, he was a chairman of a subsection of the committee. And that came in with in fact, the Colonial Developmental Welfare Office ordered an investigation into the circumstances. And social pathologist as he was, George Saini concluded that the problems in the Caribbean that led to the disturbances was first and foremost because the family was dysfunctional. It was the family. He blamed it on that. And then secondary was poverty. So what did the authorities try to do? The authorities came with this colonial mentality to impose the idea of nuclear families and married and all of that. And you know what they did? You know what they did, sir? They tried to get marriage among all the lower class families in the Caribbean because they perceived that to be the problem. And in Jamaica, Lady Huggins, the wife of the governor at the time, decided that they were going to marry people, and they carried out mass marriages in Jamaica, and it failed. It failed. We still have the problems. In other words, when they should have been attempting to fix the system, they attempted to fix the people. It was a system that was causing the problem. Why is this bill now necessary, sir? Because it attempts to fix part of the system. And furthermore, organizations in the Caribbean began to take the same approach by George Saini and his committee. The Anglican Church, sir, in Barbados, took that approach. And so what did they do? They formed the Mothers Union, which in my view has now become irrelevant to the Caribbean. Like the Anglican Church has become irrelevant in my view. There needs to be some changes to that. But the Mothers Union was formed to teach people how to get married. In fact, they had in their prayer, bless all those who are married. What about my mother? Bless all those who are married. And then it's still excluded from that clique who used to hold tea parties and all of that. Excluded from that were some middle class women who were married but were still not welcome into it. So they formed then the Ladies Auxiliary. I think it's the Ladies Auxiliary. The Women's Auxiliary. The Women's Auxiliary. Yeah, the president of the church went to. Yes, they formed the Women's Auxiliary. And that did not work either. Because there were some persons who were poor and who were not married, whom the Women's Auxiliary would not admit, so they formed the Women's Fellowship. I'm saying that there was always an attempt to fix the person and not the system. One of the things that we have done, sir, is to say to some of our children that they do not belong, that they do not fit in. Why? Even the church is guilty of it. Because when some children, parents took their children even to be baptized, you look at some of those old baptismal certificates, you see the prejudices. legit or illegit. This child is a legitimate child, which meant that the child was born into a married situation. Illegit, like me, sir. I was not born into a married situation. So the whole thing, we have accustomed to trying to fix the person rather than fix the system that was contributing towards what we call the confusion in our societies. I must commend the government, though, because it is about legislative reform. It's about modernizing legislation. Let me say, sir, that as children, we will make mistakes. And I see myself in this, because I myself have made several mistakes. But if I did not have a community that looked after me, I don't know where I would be today. Children will fail at times. And with encouragement, when they fail, they will learn. When they learn, they progress. And when they progress, they develop. I was a bit disappointed, sir, when this legislation was introduced into the lower house. I was disappointed. Because the leader of the opposition came in, and on such matter of importance, I was there, sir. Came in, sat for about 2 or 3 minutes, scurried through paper and left. And that is why, sir, I appreciate so much the speech made by Senator Watson this afternoon. I appreciate it. I take it that was an aside. But I really do. Because it shows that there is someone who is prepared to take an alternative path to the leader and contribute towards the development of this country. So I'm speaking fast. I was there, so I heard his speech. I know some of you will be saying that I'm biased, but I'm not. It was a good speech, man. Mr. President, I look at this bill, and I know it is called the Justice Bill, but I would also somehow try to impart the word mercy. You see, sometimes with justice we get what we deserve. I steal from you, I get the punishment. But with mercy, is when you look at me and you say, I know that this is what you did. I know you deserve this punishment. However, I am going to ensure that you live a wholesome life. And that is why I say that it is mercy. Mercy because, sir, I grew up in a village. I think we were the poorest village in Barbados. But I know I grew up in the absence of legislation to protect me. I grew up among persons who protected me. Can you imagine that I grew up in a situation where boys were leaving home? Those of us who grew up as boys know that we like to run about. But I grew up in a situation where the legislation I could be charged for wandering. For doing what a boy could do, I would have been charged for that and taken to dogs. And then Charles Morris would be a dog's boy. And I speak with a certain degree of passion on this, because it is true. I I know persons who were arrested because, in fact, the person who arrested them, who held them, the watchman who held them, did not even know where the boy got the cane from, the sugar cane from. But he arrested, grabbed the boy, and took him to the plantation manager because the boy had more than 6 joints of cane. These are things that young boys were subjected to because of the legislation that stood before them. Boys were picked up off the streets. We were raised by a village. And you see, the reason why this legislation is more important is because that village responsibility is no longer there. I grew up, sir, and I heard Senator Watson referring to the different aspects of the law. I grew up, sir, in a society, even at school, where children with disabilities, if we did not, ordinary people did not have much justice or many rights, those with disabilities had fewer. They had fewer. And some of us used to laugh at them. This piece of legislation protects them as well. Because in those days, we did not know better. I keep referring to growing up in Blackbest. I'm going to give a personal story. Blackbest, we were prepared for manhood. People there saw it. And it is as if they gave us, taught us the rites of passage. There's one person that I always commend for the way he took me and took all of us as young men into his house. A fellow called Edwin Small, sir. We call him Nasser. And sir, anytime you should come to Blackbest, I would like to introduce you to some Naz wine. He's the maker of it. I would like to introduce you to that. It's the best wine you can get anywhere. But he took us and he nourished us. He nurtured us, and we developed into individuals that people expected us to be. Because when we were going to school, there were people in Blackbest who felt that there was a set of us who were very bright. Because up to that point, I think in the 1970s, there was not one person with an O level. But they saw something in us that we did not see in ourselves. And we were boys. I'm going to say something, sir, that still moves me to this day. And I see that the young people aren't here, but I want to say, anytime that we are going to leave home to revenge a situation, when you leave home, call 2 people, the police and the undertaker. Undertaker, revenge is a very serious thing. And I learned that lesson, sir. When I was about 12 years old, I struck a young lady with a rock. I hit her, she fell beside me. Yes. You can administrate from there too. She fell. And only because she burst my mouth the Wednesday, and this was a Saturday. And I ran home. I can tell anybody, sir, that the most painful blows I have ever received, I never got them. I did something wrong, waiting for lashes because I know that they ought to be punished. Saturday afternoon, nothing happened. Saturday night, nothing happened. Sunday morning, well, I know I went to church, and Sunday afternoon I came back from church. This is what my grandmother said to me. She said, go in the larder, take up some flour, and make a woman. a woman. And I thought she was joking. I thought she was joking. And she, in a loud, in an audible voice, as we would say in the church, in an audible voice, I said, get up, get the flower, and make a woman. And he did that. And we didn't have water in the house. We had to travel to the standpipe for water. It was 5 bags, 5 pounds of flour. It was the only 5 pounds of flour that was in the house. And he began to make the woman. And one minute the dough was too hard, so I had to put in water. The next minute the dough was too soft, and I had to put in flour. And when the 5 pounds of flour was gone, I said to my grandmother, "Ma, I can't make a woman." And I started to cry. And she said, "That is the point. You can't make them, don't hit them." And I went to defend myself. She said, "You hear what I said? You can't make them, don't hit them." Then she said, "When you see somebody, first you do is say something nice, because that would, So if Senator Cummings and Senator Parris and Senator Watson and all the other females in here wonder why I say nice things when I see them, that is the reason. Oh, because of you. But that is the reason, sir. That does not guarantee nice things, sir. But I do tell you nice things. That, sir, was an experience. And I'm saying that the social network that was there for me is now not there for a lot of children growing up in this society. And that is why this legislation is necessary. But if we are to have our children develop, as is everybody has spoken, education. And when it comes to education, sir, I believe that I start back, and that goes to the common entrance exam. I believe, sir, that this common entrance exam, I'm going to use some harsh words for it, is the most vicious and iniquitous system to be imposed on this country. This common entrance exam was introduced during the early 60s to maintain the status quo. To maintain the status quo. In fact, I think the person who did it was a gentleman from England who planned the whole thing to maintain the status quo. If you were rich or you came from a well-to-do family, you can bet that you were going to one of the good or the better secondary schools. I mean, there were a few exceptions. That common entrance exam still existed there, and is still maintaining social divisions. This week, Miss Senator Watson referred to a situation, but this week again, parents proud of their children, and they ought to be. But have we ever taken note of what happens to those children who are not in the papers? Have we taken note of the effect that this would have on those children who would be going to St. Lucie or St. George or Brantley Adams? But yet we brag about the system. And let me say to you, sir, if say, and I'm going to just mention 2 schools, if Harrison's College and Queen's College get the cream of the crop at common entrance, most apparently it used to be the lodge. But that's a different matter now. But if they get the cream of the crop, 180 and 180 is what? 360? You are getting 360 of the students, of the what, 4,000 or 5,000 students who do the exam. You are getting the best of the crop. But if at the end of 5 years or 6 years, you can only produce 24 scholarships, then something is wrong. Something is wrong. Going to the same school, you are getting the best. You should be producing more scholarships than you're getting now. The more 24. In some years, we are very low on them. So something is wrong for the system. I did not pass the, in fact, let me put it this way. I was told that I did not pass the common entrance exam. I was told that. I felt badly. But you know what, sir? There's a black belt school that they pushed down, and the fellows went in there and found some papers with those students who had passed the common entrance exam but were not allowed to go to contemporary or the schools for which they passed. Why? Because the principal or the headmaster at the school wanted boys to remain in school, as Senator King said, to work in the garden. And I remember going to the garden in the hot sun, sir, and working. That kind of thing would be sending. If I didn't have the societal support, I don't know where I would have been. And let me say this also. I mean, I use it to my advantage. So I was hard ears. I don't do it. I was hard ears when we were going. Boys are hard ears. Not wicked. Not bad, but hard ears. Yes, I was hard ears. Yes, I was. I use it because when I was sent to the table for lashes, I used the garden as the excuse. I come, sir, to tell you that I go in the garden. I come to ask you to go and move the holes in the garden. But it is a system that criminalizes or causes many of our young people, young boys in particular, to be criminalized. I did not pass the exam. You know what that exam is saying to young people in this country? That you are not good enough. It was saying to me that I was not good enough to go to one of those, the Harrison's College or Queen's College. It was saying to me that I was not good enough to go to Codrington College to be a priest. It was saying to me that I was not good enough to go to the University of the West Indies. It was saying to me that I was not good enough to be a teacher at Combermere School. At 11 years, that common entrance exam was saying to me that you were not good enough to be the Deputy High Commissioner for Barbados and the United Kingdom. It was saying to me that I am not good enough to stand here in this Senate to discuss legislation for the improvement of young people who were in my position. And they went, sir. And I'm here today. But there's more to it. Because some of these institutions that are supposed to protect us didn't. I went to college, trained to be a priest at 19 years old. And 6 weeks into the class, a Greek class, sir, 6 weeks. A tutor looked at me and did like this. He said, "You are so black, I cannot even see you." No poor black boy had any right being a priest. Sir, I was 19. Tell that to some person who did not have the societal support, and you will see what happened. We have schools now. Yes, we are going to pass this. Oh, I believe it will be passed. This bill. But let me say this. We've got to look at our primary schools. Secondary schools too, because they taught a lot. And we have, if we have not gone back yet, we have to go back to diagnostic testing of our children in the schools. diagnostic testing, sir. We have to find out, first of all, if our students need remedial help. We have to find out if our students can read. We have to find out if they can hear. We have to find out if they can see properly. We even have to find out their circumstances so that we can help them. So I remember once in a class reading, and I do that to every class I teach from first to sixth. I mean, I can't be last year I teach sixth form, first form. But I would always ask in those first few weeks, children to read a passage that we are doing. Because if you can't read it, I don't know how you can get through. And I remember seeing a boy every minute he'd look like this. I come, I pass, I pull down the book. In 2 twos, the book is back up here. And he did it 2 or 3 times, 3 or 4 times that I recognized he had a problem. I left the class, sir. And I went, took out the card, and called the parent. The parent said the mother said she suspected something was wrong because he wasn't reading properly. Even if he read it out, he couldn't call the word properly. And I said, well, maybe you need to take him to an optician. And she said she did not have the money. And I said, come to the school, get a card, and go up to Warren's. And I lived to hear, he got glasses. And I lived to hear that student tell the cricket coach, sir, I always heard that grass was green, but this is the first time that I've seen it green. Diagnostic teaching, sir. And I hope Senator Watson would support me on this, because it was her party that taught the diagnostic testing in schools. It was her party that did it, you know. Huh? Which faction? I don't know which faction, sir. I don't know, because I realize that there's a de facto leader and a de jure leader, and neither the twain shall meet. So I don't know which is which.
Yes, Senator Watson.
Mr. President, on the point of elucidation, I have to disagree. I have children in school, and I know what was going on in the schools while my party was in power. That is incorrect, Mr. President. And the Honourable Senator should be asked to withdraw that statement.
So the point you're saying that what is incorrect that is being asked to withdraw?
That diagnostic testing, he says teaching, calls it teaching, was discontinued by the Democratic Labour Party, Mr. President.
So I was in the school, I was teaching, and this was something that concerned the unions, that concerned the Barbados Secondary Teachers Union, and it also concerned the Barbados Union of Teachers that diagnostic testing was taught. Why are you talking to Airy Fraser?
Yes, Senator Watson.
Mr. President, perhaps Senator Morris would be so kind as to tell us exactly what he means when he says diagnostic testing. Diagnostic testing of what? Specifically, what was discontinued before he doubles down on that erroneous statement.
The specifics will help.
I don't know, sir.
Testing of what?
If she was here when it began, I said that there were children who used to be tested for hearing, tested for seeing.
Right, so you're talking about testing for vision and hearing.
Vision and hearing and seeing that was stopped by the Democratic
Not
Labour
diagnostic
Party.
testing of other things.
My wife?
Please address the chair.
I will continue, sir. But that was stopped, sir. We need to do this. I don't know if it started again, but I think if it hasn't started, with all this legislation that we are going to pass, if it is not, sir, start it now. Because it will lead to other problems. I believe, sir.
Yes, Senator Watson.
Mr. President, I want to reiterate my point of, I don't even know what I asked for, elucidation. I had a child in school at the time that received offers, because I didn't take it up, because I could go to a private doctor, offers of diagnostic testing prior to May 2018. Mr. President, I would like the Senator to withdraw his
But I suspect, I'm not in a position to say who's wrong or who's, I suspect you may both be right. Given the far-flung nature of the education system, it may very well have been done at some schools and not at others.
Sir.
But the question really as to whether diagnostic testing for vision and hearing has been stopped in a given year, I'm really not in a position to say what the truth is, to be honest with you. But Senator Watson, proceed, yes.
Mr. President, it cannot be said that it was stopped, which is an absolute. That is my contention, Mr. President. That's all. I'm not going to continue. It just is to be said for the record, I think.
Yes.
Mr. President, sir, I am not withdrawing it.
And
I am not withdrawing it.
Senator Reverend Morris,
Sir.
be guided by me.
Okay, sir.
Speak with absolute certainty about those institutions at which you knew, and perhaps they may be emblematical of the entire system, but I think so that all of us would be very certain, because like I said, you may both very well be right at the same time, but speak either from your, you adverted to the STU, you may advert to specific schools, but let us not stop the point unduly because the time clock is ticking away on your presentation.
Sir, I don't know, sir. Sir, I began with you, but all I'm saying...
In fact, you actually need to wind up.
I was going to wind up, sir, until I was interrupted, and I do not know, sir, because when she made when the honorable...
Not she.
Sir, that's what
the only honorable senator.
When the honorable senator made a statement about paying gangsters, I did not interrupt her, even though in my view, it was not true, or it is not true. But I will continue, sir. All I'm saying, sir...
You'll wind up.
What?
You'll wind up.
I'll wind up, sir. It is true, sir, that testing was done before 2018. But there was, I don't know, there was testing long before 2008 too. There was testing long before, and 2008, before 2018. But let me say, sir, let me wind up. I believe, sir, that human beings, must be given a chance. We cannot hold things against individuals for all their lives. And even what I call misdeeds committed in one's early stages of life should not be held against them forever. And that is why I support this legislation, because it gives every person a chance. And I am saying, sir, and I see two young men here, when they look at what is happening in our society, I must say, if I can make it, you too can make it. I thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Senator Reverend Rogers. Any of the speakers? Senator Blackman.
Mr. President, I rise to join this debate with what will be a relatively brief intervention this afternoon, because a lot of what I've indicated, what I want to treat to, has been discussed and debated by my colleagues hitherto. But suffice it to say, the importance of this bill, particularly also given that this chamber would have discussed the Child Protection Bill in a previous sitting of the chamber, and now we're looking at the justice aspect of that iteration, if I should call it that. There are a number of things that I really want to share with you and the country and those who are tuned in. Now, as we look at the issue of child justice, whilst it is steeped in law and treating to the issue of justice with regards to children who come before our legal system, having committed crimes, for me, this bill is really about the balance between how do we ensure that they understand that for every action there is a reaction, and in this context, justice. But equally, how do we ensure as a society that we let them know that despite their wrongdoings, that as children, the society still has an obligation to create an environment for them to prosper, to grow, and where necessary, and perhaps in all circumstances, to reintegrate into our society as young, upright citizens and residents of our nation. And why is that important? Oftentimes, and you've heard a number of honourable members speak to it, Mr. President, our society is very quick and very harsh in judging our young people. And we're talking about children. So we're not talking about people who are under 30, who are young people. We're not talking about persons who are 21 and 22 and perhaps should know a bit better. We're talking about persons between the ages of 12 and 18. And therefore, there's a certain level of responsibility that the society must have and balance as well in ensuring that justice is balanced with ensuring, as I said, that we can also create an ecosystem that should they come before the courts or the legal system in this regard for committing a crime, that they too can have an opportunity to grow and reintegrate and be productive citizens. And I therefore start on that basis for a number of reasons. When you look at where this bill has come from, and I want to also take this opportunity to commend the honourable ministers in the other place who would have debated this, but even before that, who would have had extensive consultations in ensuring that what we see here today before this chamber is nothing short, in my view, of comprehensive and forward-thinking. Because it is not only treating to the issues of child justice today, but it is so far-reaching. When I read it, I looked at it from a sociological lens with a bit of forecasting and seeing where we are going and where we could go, and that it can therefore ensure that we create an environment where our young people and children have the best level of protection, even if, as I said, they run afoul of the law. And I offer my commendation to the honourable ministers. Now, there are two bits of international guidelines from the United Nations that are woven into this bill, and I want to touch on them briefly. One, on the preventative side, in other words, helping our children to stay away from juvenile delinquency. And two, and Lord forbid, should they run afoul, how do we ensure that the system still takes care of them whilst administering justice and creating that environment and ecosystem that can reintegrate them. So the first one, as is commonly called, is the Riyadh guidelines on the preventative side, which is really the United Nations guidelines for prevention of juvenile delinquency. And in this UN guideline, Mr. President, at its core, it is really looking at how do we create a societal ecosystem. Remember, this guideline is focused on the preventative side. And it behoves us to look as a society, how do we create an ecosystem that prevents our young people, our bright people, our young people from Black Bess, our young people from Vauxhall, our young people from wherever across the country, from having to go through a situation where they have to face the courts. That is enshrined in the UN guidelines, as I said, known as the Riyadh guideline. And why is that important? Because what we are seeing here and debating here today wasn't just something that we've pulled out from the sky. This is a proven and well-used piece of international standard of regulation used by many countries around the world. And therefore, we are now following suit in ensuring that our bill is now captured in ensuring that all of our societal institutions, namely the families, community centers, schools, churches, religious institutions, all play their part in ensuring that our people and our young children in particular can have an environment that they can feel loved, they can feel appreciated, and they can thrive. And why is this so important to this debate? Because oftentimes we think that legislation is only passing of laws and the government saying this is what you need to do. And therefore, what this guideline tells you is that at the core, whilst government has a central role in the formulation, the other societal institutions have a critical role in ensuring that our children have the environment to prosper, to be safe, and they didn't use the word love, but to have a conducive environment for prosperity. And of course, we know that that is part and parcel of that ecosystem. So the Riyadh guidelines, and I would encourage everyone listening to the debate to have a read. It's not the most exciting or sexy piece of literature that you'd ever come across, but at the core, in my view, you really understand the thinking as to the guideline as well. Now, on the non-preventative side, so in circumstances where a young person, male or female, would have come before the court system, juvenile system. You look at now the Beijing rules, which is the United Nations standard for minimum rules, operative word, minimum rules for the administration of juvenile justice, which at the core looks to endeavor to create the conditions that will ensure that if you pass through that system, you still have the opportunity to attain the ecosystem that the preventative guideline was seeking to offer. So therefore, at both ends, there is a buffer intending to create that safe space for our children. And this is enshrined in the bill before us today. And why is that important? As a society, and I really want to speak to our households, our families, our mothers, our aunties, grandparents. This is a call to all of us, because I am a parent myself. We have an obligation, Mr. President, to show love, to be respectful to our children, to be respectful to our peers in the presence of our children. And why is the latter so important? Because oftentimes, it's a circumstance where, as I always say, our children are like sponges. And many times, children manifest behavior that is indicative of the environment that they're in. I remember many times before, in my primary school years and even in my early secondary school years, I had classmates of mine who would come to school sometimes in tears. And when you asked them what was the issue, their father or their mother or their auntie, whoever they were with, had big domestic arguments the morning or the night before. And their mind could not settle. And that manifested in some very tough behaviors to accept or to witness. But it wasn't that they were bad persons, but at the very core, it was the only way that they can release what was trapped inside. Because remember, Mr. President, we have a society where we always behoove our young people to keep quiet. Stop talking. So if you're telling them to stop talking or mind your business, shut up, and they're witnessing things that they ought not to witness as children, how then can they release? It's like a pressure cooker. If you don't release the top valve of the pressure cooker, I'm not any great chef, but I know if you don't release that valve enough, after a while, bladam. So the point I'm making is we have to create that environment. So whilst, yes, as I said, it is enshrined in UN principles in part, yes, it's enshrined in consultations in part, we have a duty as a society to ensure that our young people and our children have an environment that is conducive to peace and for them to be able to do what they do best, be children. But also, what I find interesting about the Beijing rules, it also requires societies, and no, I said societies and not governments, societies to mobilize all possible, operative word being possible, mobilize all possible resources at their disposal for that creation of that harmonious environment for children. And therefore, the role of the private sector, as I said, community groups, religious groups, households, football groups, you name it. We have a duty as societies to ensure that when this bill comes into force, that the whole of society approach, following the Beijing rules, the principles, the guidelines, it beholds us now to move beyond the mere passing of a bill in Parliament. We have a role to play to create that environment for our children. Now, when you look at where we are today, a lot of our colleagues today have treated the issue of crime, the ongoing crime in our societies across not just Barbados, but the Caribbean. And I want to take this opportunity to call to our young people and older people as well. We are too beautiful a society, Mr. President, for us to continue in any way, shape, or form in any level of behavior that goes against who we are as a Barbadian people. I'm calling for us to stop with the violence. I'm calling for us to stop with the hatred. I'm calling for us to stop with the revenge, and let us get back to doing what we do best, being Barbadians who punch above our weight, being Barbadians who can influence the world, being Barbadians who can be the best in cricket, best in music, best in food, best in fashion, and best at enjoying life. But you cannot do that if at the very foundational core of our society, there are issues that are preventing this. And why do I say that? For you to pass through the juvenile system, of course, then you're talking 12 to 18 years old. No child, and I stand on the basis that it would be difficult for anyone to contradict what I'm going to say. No child was ever born being deviant. No child was ever born being filled with hatred. No child was ever born with a heart and a desire to commit crime. And therefore, when you see that, it is as a result of a manifestation of collective environments being brought to bear on that child or children, causing them to manifest in those different ways. And therefore, and I think it was Senator Rogers who spoke to the issue of hunger. I think it was Senator Rogers. But if you, Mr. President, go to school and your mother or father, the night before or the morning of school, was unable to provide you or your siblings with a meal, and you are expected to go and sit in class and study, as you should, but you're expected to go and sit and focus in the tropics, let's be real today now, and sit in class and focus on that board with your 13 times table, and if you don't get it right, you get lashes, and you're hungry. What do we expect? No. Am I condoning that deviant behavior where they're manifesting? No. The point I'm making is there are some foundational things at the core that we have to address as the society, going back, as I said, to both the Riyadh rules and the Beijing rules. And the truth is, I could have replaced the word Riyadh and Beijing with the Beijing rules. Because a lot of these things in those two things are things that we have been talking about for years at the society in Barbados. But the point I'm making, Mr. President, is that our ecosystem has to be reformed, and government cannot do it alone. Legislation can change behavior in many regards, but there are other things that legislation cannot change. And therefore, we must get back to basics in a postmodern Barbados of who we are to ensure that our young people, and in particular, our children, have the right environment to prosper. And when I talk about children being sponges, one of the things that I want to briefly touch on is the fact, and we've talked about it a lot today, I talked about hunger, But I also want to talk about the issue of love. Everyone who knows me knows I'm proud to come from a place in Barbados called Vauxhall. Yeah, you didn't know that? Of course, the honourable member is having a job, but she knows it's true. A little village in Christchurch called Vauxhall. Working class neighborhood. No rich set of people. But people who love life. But oftentimes, because of the ecosystem, Mr. President, the environment can produce behavior that is not necessarily the best for the individuals, those around them, and the society as a whole. And I grew up in that neighborhood, proudly so, and I've gone to school with and was raised up with a number of bright, talented young children. But many of them face the realities that I described hitherto. Single parent homes, families quarreling, fighting physically. Sometimes the children come to school, and we're talking 30, 35 years ago, with wounds on their face. That was the environment. And when you saw them manifesting, it was as a result of that entire ecosystem. But when you look at one of the things that they lacked most, if you ask them, yes, hunger was there, but you know what was the biggest thing, Mr. President, that they lacked? They said, nobody don't love me. Because they're hearing it so much, or by virtue of the behavior that they're seeing, they felt totally removed from love. We're talking about children, we're not talking about adults here, we're talking about children. But yet, so why am I placing so much focus on this, Mr. President? Is that yes, we have a juvenile system, a justice system that has to take care of children when they do wrong. We get that, and they must be held accountable for their actions, because also part of being an adult in a progressive modern society is that you have to be able to take responsibility for your actions. But we have too many examples in our society that we must now ensure that we go into that preventative mode instead of the reactive mode oftentimes. And when they talk about lack of love, it hurts you. And I'm calling again on parents and societies and communities in society, show your children love. Teachers, continue to show your children love. Because oftentimes, when you don't receive it at home, then you end up on the proverbial block. And they show you love. Sometimes in a way that is not good for you. But the point I'm making is we have to protect our people at the onset. Now, when you look at my community again, before I go on, I will never forget, Mr. President, I grew up with a young man who was known to the court. He was too familiar to the court, let me put it that way. By the age of 18, he had been to juvenile prison 16 times. 16 times. But he was one of the best cricketers you can find. Best. We used to play cricket in the road, hardball. And most of the guys would play with pads, if you could afford the pads. And he was the only person who dared to go in the road and play cricket without pads, with a hard ball. And you couldn't get him out. Why? Because he had an ability for sport and cricket. And if he was able to channel that, I believe he would have probably played for West Indies last week in the T20 here. If the opposite. So the point I'm making is we don't know who we are turning away when we create these little silos of negative ecosystems at the onset for our children. We have to do better. Now, whilst this is, as I said, steeped in the law, it also behoves us to break down some of the inequalities, and we've touched on this before, and I want to echo the sentiment of the Honourable Senator Morris in his call and support for the speech today and contribution by Honourable Senator Watson, because I believe that she should be given due commendation, Mr. President, for what in my view is her continued, on most occasions, let me caveat that, on most occasions, taking principle and notwithstanding the view of the leader of her party, taking a completely different line in the interest of fairness and justice on these critical matters of importance to our society.
How about you, Senator Watson?
Mr. President, I suppose you can say that his statement, Senator Morris, referred to the leader of the opposition not being interested in development. And I ought to have requested that he revoke that statement. But I think it is, because you cannot say what is in his mind and you cannot demonstrate that he's not interested in development. Mr. President, Mr. President.
Senator Watson. Senator Morris, please.
Blackman, I'm asking Senator Blackman also to withdraw those statements in relation to the mind and the actions of the leader of the opposition, because they are simply incorrect.
I'm not sure about just clarify a bit more for me, because I heard Senator Blackman to be saying that you take a position that's different from those of the leader of the opposition. The reference to we cannot impute improper motives or try to deduce what is in the person's mind. Just be a bit clear if you're asking for things to be struck, just to be clear on exactly what you want to have struck.
And I want him to withdraw his comments related to what is in the mind of the leader of the opposition, whether he can be an opinion. He's saying that the leader of the opposition is taking, Mr. Johnson, taking particular positions that indicate that he does not support the child justice bill, because that is not the position that the leader of the opposition took. He spoke on particular issues, but he did support the child justice bill. And so it is not correct to say that he did not do so, or to impute that he did not do so, and I'd like any statements that suggest that to be withdrawn.
Okay. Senator Blackman, just for the utmost of clarity and simplicity, withdraw those comments and move on from there. You can stick to what Senator Watson, because we can't be sure, I'm not sure what positions were taken in the House or not, so I can't adjudicate it, but just withdraw it and make your comments and presentation and move on.
Mr. President, as I've said many times before, in a similar circumstance, I will always be guided by your leadership. Always be. As a fellow foundation boy. However, I want to add, as I continue, I still want to place on record my praise for Senator Watson in her continued articulation on most issues when it comes to articulating positions that are of critical importance to our society. And in my view, and in the view held by many in the country, that differs to her leader in our party. But as I move on, how much time do I have, Mr. President?
You actually need to start winding up. You have about 2 minutes.
2 minutes.
Yes.
And perhaps, I know the rules don't allow, but in a bit of creativity, if in future debates I can borrow a bit of time from our Senator Watson, that would be good. I know that is not possible, Mr. President, sir. But that notwithstanding, I think we have here, Mr. President, a seminal moment, even after the bill is passed. For all of us, senators, parliamentarians from the other place, government, opposition, unions, schools, educators, religious institutions, to embrace our young people. If we want to talk about crime prevention, some of the things that I spoke to, and many of my colleagues, actually all of us in here as senatorial colleagues, if we put these things in action, and if we roll up our sleeves, and we embrace our young people in love, we show them respect, we create the systems that continue to provide for them. And that's why I'm proud to be part of an administration that is also doing its part. When you look at that tenet of the guideline, it speaks to allocation of all possible resources to create that ecosystem. To be part of an administration that continues to provide the opportunities for the ordinary working class, family and person in this country, so that we can continue to not only build, but to prevent further problems in our society with respect to deviance and young people. But once we can get this right, Mr. President, I'm of the firm view that Barbados will continue to be a prosperous society, a just society, a society that looks after its people, notwithstanding that you might have institutions, politically or otherwise, that may have confusion from time to time, but a society nonetheless that is ready to lead and take care of its people. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Blackman. Any other speakers? Let's wind up then. Senator Cummins.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I want to, as is the norm, express appreciation to all of the honourable speakers who have spoken and have given their own contribution from many different angles to today's debate. Starting first of all with a Leader of Opposition Business, Senator Tricia Watson, thank you for your contribution. I do want to point out that the government has engaged, especially on matters relating to youth, Professor Dwayne Devonish, to whom you referred repeatedly and quoted from extensively in much of those bodies of work. And so they were many of the bodies of work were requested by and done on behalf of the government and are therefore reflective of some of the work that the government is doing, expects to do, plans to do, and much of the work that you may see before us. And I do want to acknowledge that as part of the government's work, and of course our relationship obviously with the University of the West Indies as not just a tertiary level institution, but as a source of research and policy-based research in particular for this government. Mr. President, Senator John King, in his contribution, was his usual self, having been a Minister of Youth in a previous life. I'm certain that everyone appreciated his perspective, and also having had direct and personal involvement with the Government Industrial School, also in a previous life, I am confident that his contribution would have added value to the discussion. Senator John Rogers, obviously speaking from his perspective, one, as a member of the committee, being involved in the work of the committee, the deliberations of the committee, hearing the various submissions coming from members of the public and all of the various interest groups, his contribution was important. And I want to make the point here in response to, perhaps not a response to, but maybe even as an addendum to the combined comments of Senator Blackman, Senator Morris, Senator King, and Senator Rogers, but I think all of us have those experiences where there are people with whom we grew up, whose paths were very divergent, largely on the basis of where they came from and the challenges that they were experiencing in their household. I've said here before, I didn't go to private primary school. I went to public primary school, St. George Primary, where my family is from, St. George. I went to St. George Primary School, and there were children that I sat next to in class who I had the benefit of parents and a mother who was in the education system and insisted on me being and doing certain things. But there are many children who spend a lot of time now, who I see now as adults, who sit in front of Senator Rogers' church, who spend their time there, who were there when I was a child with them, and who are there still now all these years later. And many times if I pass through that area, they're shouting, Lisa, 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 you remember me? I don't remember them sometimes, not because I don't, but because they don't look the way they used to when we were in school. And it really is a function of sometimes where your household was positioned. And people who are challenged oftentimes in their households with parents who may be facing different levels of poverty, may have needed help themselves, may have needed support themselves. These are the challenges that a country has to deal with. And it is on that basis, Mr. President, that I want to share that Aside from the work that we have talked about in our social agencies, the work being done by the Ministry of People Empowerment and Elder Affairs, aside from the work being done by the Child Care Board at the child level, there is also, Mr. President, a body of work being done by this government on parenting. The importance of parenting skills, the importance of parenting, the ability of parents to have the benefit of a dedicated training program. And so I want to highlight in that regard the work of Parados, and it is the expectation of this government that we will make sure that bodies of work just like Parados will continue not just to exist, but will be expanded to be able to have greater uptake by more parents who need that kind of support. Senator Andrele Boyce and Senator Morris spoke also about, I think everyone had a conversation, justifiably so, on the way in which our education system and our society have contributed to some of the issues that we're facing in our justice system, Mr. President. And so I believe that we are all on the same page today in perhaps a rare moment of solidarity in pursuit of our children's future. In the interest of supporting justice for children, protection for children, and I bring the two things together, Mr. President, because they constitute a single report from the Standing Committee on Social Affairs coming from both houses of Parliament. And with these few summary words to close off this debate, Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill be read a second time.
Thank you, Senator Cummins. The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Your Honour do not leave the chair and the Senate resolves itself into committee for further deliberation on this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself in a committee for further consideration of this bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee. Permission granted.
Part 1, clauses 1 to 3.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 to 3 stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 through 3 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 4 to 6.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 4 through 6 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 4 through 6 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. All those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 7 to 11.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 3, clauses 7 through 11 stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 7 through 11 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 12 to 23.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 12 through 33 stand part, through 23 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 12 through 23 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say nay. The ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 24 to 39, to 41.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 24 through 41 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 5, clauses 24 through 41 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say nay. The ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 42 to 49.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 42 through 49 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 42 to 49 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 50 to 64.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 50 through 64 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 50 through 64 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 65 and 66.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 8, clauses 65 and 66 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 8, clauses 65 and 66 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 9, clause 67.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 9, inclusive of clause 67, do now stand part.
The question is that Part 9, which includes clause 67, do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Part 10, clauses 68 through 93.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 10, clauses 68 through 93 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 10, clauses 68 through 93 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 11, clauses 94 to 108.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 11, clauses 94 through 108 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 11, clauses 94 through 108, 94 through 108 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 12, clauses 109 to 112.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 12, clauses 109 through 112 stand part.
The question is that Part 12, clauses 109 through 112 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Part 13, clauses 113 to 118.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that Part 13, clauses 113 and 100 through 118 do now stand part.
The question is that Part 13, clauses 113 to 118 do now stand part. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
First schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be now the first schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be now the second schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour, would you please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. The ayes have it.
The fourth schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fourth schedule be now the fourth schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The fifth schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fifth schedule be now the fifth schedule to the bill. All honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The sixth schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the sixth schedule be now the sixth schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say no? The ayes have it.
The seventh schedule.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that the seventh schedule be the seventh schedule to the bill.
The question is that the seventh schedule be now the seventh schedule to the bill. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against, would you please say nay? The ayes have it.
Madam Chair, I beg to move that you do now report to His Honour the President the passage of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Will those honourable senators against please say no? The ayes have it.
The chairman has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill now be read a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, I beg to move that this bill do now pass and be cited as the Child Justice Act 2024.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Child Justice Act 2024. Will all honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Senator Cummins.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I beg to move the adjournment. Actually, I think we're reverting to public business.
We commit presentation of papers.
Presentation of papers.
Mr. President, we have a document that has come up from the Cabinet Office, and I am commanded to lay the income tax automatic exchange of information amendment regulations of 2024. This document I'm commanded to lay as a document in the Honourable Senate, Mr. President.
Senator Cummings.
Mr. President, thank you very much. I beg to move the adjournment of this sitting of the Honourable Senate, sine die.
The question is that the Honourable Senate do now adjourn sine die. Will all Honourable Senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Thank you very much, Honourable Senators. I wish everyone a wonderful weekend. Thank you very much for giving up your Friday in the public interest. This sitting is adjourned sine die.